This is Sportish.
Do it better.
This is Sportish. This is Sportish. This is Sportish. This is Sportish.
This is Sportish, the show about sports, ostensibly started during a global sports shutdown. My name is Geoff Brault. I'm joined by Dr. Keith Strudler. He is the director of the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University. Our producer is Mike Wallace. You won't see him. You probably won't hear him, but he's here, and he's the reason that we look way more professional than we deserve to look. And I say we look more professional than we deserve to look is because you may be listening to this through its audio medium as a podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or wherever you choose to get your audio podcast. But perhaps you're one of the legions of people that have discovered us on the For the Fans network. This is the second time that we have been seen right here on For the Fans, DirecTV, Twitch, FTFnext.com. There's a whole mess of ways that you can watch this program. And Keith, we've been on it now for one solid week, 7 or so days. We've been sort of out in the public consciousness as, let's be honest, visible people, notable visible people. I thought our lives would change more. At least I thought mine would change more. I tell you, pretty much still the same.
Yeah, I was expecting going to the supermarket would be more problematic than it was. I actually found that I had a clear flow of traffic, especially when I was following the one-way lines on my supermarket floors. I'm attributing it to the fact that, I think people are giving us the space that we deserve as budding celebrities. I think that's part of it. They don't necessarily want to make us feel uncomfortable. I appreciate that. On the other hand, feel free to make me feel uncomfortable as you'd like. So it's okay. We're just human beings like everyone else. We're just people. Secondly, I think it's the mask. I think the mask is throwing people off. I think once we get past this pandemic and we take the masks off, I think trouble could be brewing.
We had our Twitter handles on the screen. You see them right now if you're watching, for a solid hour of network television. One new follower.
I would also make the argument that perhaps the midnight to 1 a.m. time slot that we started in may have caused some confusion, perhaps, and that might have made our audience, shall I say, as Spinal Tap likes to say, more selective. And so as we do settle into a regular time slot, which we will let you know as soon as we know, of course, which I'm hoping is not 12 to 1 a.m. because it does not work well with my circadian rhythms. And so I'm hoping that we can move to a more palatable time for everyone. But look, if you're on For the Fans now, congratulations. You're one of the early adopters. And this is going to be like Will Chamberlain's 100-point game. You're going to be able to say, you were there when we started. Everyone else is going to pretend that they were. You were actually there. So congratulations to you.
This is also, and I think that's a good analogy, I think it's also your chance to buy Apple stock in the early 1980s, right? You don't want to be that guy who, when it got, or early 1970s, whenever Apple started, I don't know, when it got to like 1980 and they were going to hit it big, you don't want to be that guy who cashed out in 1974. Don't be that guy who's like, yeah, I made $10 million off Apple. And like, what would your shares have been worth today? $11 billion. Don't be that guy. Jump on board now. And here's why we think you should hang out with us, as we tried doing this program. So we like to live with the benefit of hindsight. We take a look back at some of the stories from the previous week, analyze the impact that we think that these stories are going to have on sports and society, hence Sportish. It is things that involve sports and things that are sports adjacent. We also like to take timely topics, talk to experts about those timely topics, and kind of project what we think the impact will be on the future, and then cycle it back a little bit and check in and see if we're right. We actually have a segment called See We Were Right and See We Were Wrong, where we fact check ourselves. You don't usually get that very often. No. Keith likes when he's right, does not care for when he's wrong.
No.
And you're going to see the dichotomy of that a little bit later in this episode. We're, of course, going to talk about whether we're going to have major sports, professional or college, because of the coronavirus pandemic. That's something that we've been chronicling since the beginning of this show, and we're going to continue to do it as long as it needs to be done. It's kind of the genesis of our raison d'etre, if you will. But first, Right now, the sports world and the visible people in it have found their way to the forefront of the discussion about racial justice in our society. And two stories that have come out in the past week, I think, really illustrate this. We now have, I think, the full picture of what happened in NASCAR over the last week, Keith, with Bubba Wallace finding what someone on his team, it wasn't Bubba Wallace himself, but someone on his team found what he said appeared to be a noose in Bubba Wallace's randomly assigned garage. Word of this got out. NASCAR rallied behind Bubba Wallace. He had a big public show of support for him. Almost immediately, people are like, wait a minute, these garages, they're so locked down. How could this happen? There's security everywhere. And then the FBI went in and did an investigation, and they said what I believe was the best case scenario. No hate crime was committed.
Sure.
There was something that looks awfully like a noose hanging in this garage. And that set off this odd firestorm of people kind of telling on themselves, where depending what your perspective of this was, if you're like, I just want to watch my NASCAR and don't have to hear about anything else, you were like, see, all you people, you blew this all out of proportion. And other people were like, it's clearly a noose. And if you look at the pictures, it clearly is. And you know, I think what came out of this was arguably the best case scenario. No hate crime. People showing support for someone that needed support, regardless of whether or not there was a noose hanging in their garage. And I think the worst thing that comes out of it is we've again proven that people really struggle to hold two competing true thoughts in their head at the same time. And the backlash, or maybe that's the wrong word, but the people's reaction to the true story was less than encouraging to me.
Yeah, and so look, in many ways, the story of the noose became the red herring, because it becomes fairly irrelevant when, well, as we now know that it was not done in the immediacy of Bubba Wallace, asking that the Confederate flag not be part of NASCAR's, official ethos, which was a long time coming and got the support of all of the drivers, and I say most of the public at this point. And I can't speak specifically to the NASCAR public. So Bubba Wallace being on the forefront of racial justice and putting himself out and taking a stand, that seemed to come in consort with a noose then showing up, being placed in his garage. We're happy to know that that was not someone that went in to essentially, terrorize Bubba Wallace and do what we thought he did. And it wasn't a hate crime. Once we knew that, and you made that kind of the right point, that the reaction of the drivers was exactly what we wanted to see, which is the entirely white, largely Southern driving core that makes up NASCAR got behind Bubba Wallace and made it a unified front. So it was no longer, while Bubba Wallace obviously becomes kind of singular because he's the only black driver in the sport, it became a unified statement. That's exactly what you'd want to see. So whether or not, and let's be clear, that looks like a noose. Like I don't have a whole lot of other explanations.
And oh boy, I don't know if you saw this on Twitter or wherever, the people that were so technical about their knots, like, well, it's not a noose. A noose has to have 13 loops and that one only has 9. So clearly any reasonable person, that is ridiculous.
Yeah. But again, in the end of the day, it doesn't matter. What matters is that people that NASCAR, that a Southern sport that has, kind of certainly Southern racist lineage, right? At least in its symbolic nature, that the drivers and the people that represent the sport as it is today rallied behind racial justice and stood up for what's right. It doesn't really matter at this point when that rope got put into that garage and who put it there and what their initial intent was. I think what we learned was what drivers care about and what they're willing to do to support racial justice. Everything else, like, we shouldn't even be at this point. I understand maybe the FBI might want to just try to figure out how that came to be. And it's good that they went in and had that investigation. Everything else is, as you say, it's a red herring. And I don't think we need to then say, and I think some people will say, see, we're not all that racist. Look, no one did this. It's irrelevant. We know that hate crimes exist. We know that these symbols find their way into the public conscience one way. I mean, this has happened, more recently than we'd like to know at college campuses across the country, right? And so it's not like we have to go back very far to find an actual noose being placed, inappropriately and as a hate crime. So it's irrelevant. I think you're right. I think this is a positive step. Look, NASCAR's made a lot of positive steps forward.
And it's also a great lesson in perspective, because a black person or someone who is part of a black person's team can look at this garage pull down, which is its technical purpose, and say, oh, that looks like a noose and that's offensive. Whereas a year's worth of race car teams that were in this stall just looked at it as a garage pull down rope. And I think whether you're talking about what the rope that gets the door closed looks like, or you're talking about the chant at the college football game, or you're talking about the flag of a state, there are going to be some people who look at it one way, and there are going to be other people that look at it another way. And this whole moment is saying, hey, because you don't see what these other people see, what they see is still valid. And we shouldn't do things that offend those people, especially when it's something like a garage pull-down rope. If you're defending the way the rope looks, and well, that's like a good way to get the garage door closed, there are other ways to do that, just as there are other things you can chant at a football game, and there are other things you can put on your flag that celebrate your state. And I think this was a really nice microcosm of that.
Absolutely. And this is going to be the narrative around statues all across the country, but particularly on college campuses, because college campuses in the South are kind of littered with examples of statues. I mean, look, even at Princeton, the Woodrow Wilson School of Public Policy is no longer that. So you'll see this become, depending on what college sports looks like this fall, you might see these conversations happening repeatedly, right? And as we discussed before we got on the air, I mean, Mississippi has changed their state flag, and Ole Miss has gone through this process over the course of the past several years. College sports might look, and college football in the South might look a little bit different over the next couple of years than it has in the past, which is a good thing.
One other area in the world of sports that intersected with what we're talking about with racial justice in society happened in the world of barnstorming professional softball. An entire team mutinied on their GM, the Scrapyard Dogs franchise, which is one of essentially two barnstorming teams made up of 50% of the best softball players in America. The other is USSA Pride, and they just go around the country. And they usually go around the country. Now they play each other on location.
Are we doing a show in like the 30s? Are we 20? Yeah, they would barnstorm,
right? They rolled into Tuscaloosa. No. Anyway, they were playing a softball game, and they were playing the National Anthem before this game, which was odd in the first place because there were no fans in the stands. But either way, they were playing the National Anthem before the game. All the players were lined up along the baseline standing for it. The general manager of the Scrapyard Dogs team, who's also in charge of the team's Twitter account and who is also the owner of the team.
It's a lean organization. They had some furloughs, obviously. It's a pandemic. So.
Sent out a tweet tagging the president that said, Scrapyard Dogs stand for the National Anthem, at real Donald Trump. The players played the game, and then after the game, all got back to the locker room, checked their phones, and were like, you need to see this. And universally, within hours, decided that they would never play for this team again, and didn't, and walked out and took a stand, and have actually, in the 6 or however many days since, started their own team called This Is Us, essentially started to represent the values that they want to see represented. This is quite the stand. This is the level that I think people are like, well, athletes have never taken it to that level before. The college football team have never refused to play. This is the first time we've seen it taken to that level.
I've never had a problem with playing the national anthem. I'm kind of ambivalent to it. As a former athlete, like it always felt weird because you'd be at a meet and you'd be ready to go and you're like loosen up, and then they start playing. You're like, oh, I got to sit here for this. And you're trying to stay loose.
Nope. Sitting is the one thing you can't do.
But you're running. As a track guy, you're always running. But you're standing and trying to keep your legs loose. So you're like shaking out your legs. And by the way, everyone is deep in thought. Like I always like they show people like they're deep in thought, like they're actually thinking about the song. All you're thinking about is like, well, there's a big hill in that first mile. I gotta really get out. I gotta get out. I gotta get positioned before the dog leg turn. Like, so no one's actually thinking about it. I think what I would hope that this could remind us is whether or not they're going to play the national anthem, what we should remind ourselves is the national anthem should be yet another opportunity for people to have their own form of political expression. So play the national anthem if you want, just don't politicize it. And I understand that may sound simple, but allow people to do what they want during the national anthem, right? You can sit, I think the players stood for the national anthem, and I kind of, and I this may be interpreted the wrong way, I like standing for the national anthem. Like there's something, I find there's something kind of communal about the experience. I am in no way offended by people that choose to do something else as well. If the guy next to me wants to sit down, if the guy wants to make, totally fine. I happen to enjoy it. So I don't mind them playing the national anthem as part of a sporting contest, but I think we should not use that as a political pawn.
I understand that. I think there are people that care very much what people do during the national anthem. And I think it's unfair to say that they're wrong necessarily. They just have a different viewpoint. And to me, this illustrates, you say, don't make it political. Well, the players also made it political. They just made it political in a stance that I agree with, that you agree with. Sure. The team owner made it political as well by saying, hey, look, these players are standing for the national anthem. Isn't that great? Isn't that what we want to see? And depending on what your politics are, is probably going to determine whose side you're on in this debate. I think what we've learned is that everyone is entitled to their political opinions, and you're not immune to the consequences thereof. The team owner put out her political opinion. It's not illegal. There's nothing wrong with that. You may even agree with it. The players then exercised their right to not play for that person. And these things may keep happening as long as they keep happening and people continue to publicize these political opinions. I just don't see the world in which sports ever become apolitical. People are like, stick to sports, just play your games and don't talk about what you think. That ship has sailed.
Yeah, I would also say, look, people have been either not standing or turning their back on the national anthem for generations. It just didn't used to be as hot of an issue. I mean, before Trump, basically. I mean, it was hot before then anyway, but we weren't nearly as divided. So you could kind of and certainly before the era where everything that someone did had a second, third, and fourth life on social. So, if someone did it, it was on the TV news and the news cycle went away, it was over. Now, if someone does something that is perceived as political, it becomes a meme and it becomes essentially armor for the other side, right? So when someone makes a political stand, so when these athletes stood up, that became a tool for the right to make a statement about what the national anthem means and what this country means. It didn't used to be that way.
Yeah, I think we just don't represent other people's politics. When the team owner sent out a tweet showing the players standing for the national anthem, you essentially ascribed a political opinion to those people. And they said, well, that's not my opinion. I don't believe that. And so they were justifiably upset about that. People, in a sense, did the same thing to Colin Kaepernick when they're like, well, he's disrespecting the troops. You're ascribing a political opinion to him that he does not have. And that's, I think, where a lot of the trouble comes from. But look, I continue to fully support and welcome people that have something to lose and that have a platform speaking up, because that's how real change gets made. And that's how noise gets made. That's how people like us start talking about issues that need to be spoken about. And sports continues to be at the forefront of that. Shifting to coronavirus. The first Division I conference came out with a plan for how they're going to return to sports in the fall, a in-writing concrete plan for how sports are going to be played. It was the Patriot League, small Division I league located in the Northeast. The Patriot League in the fall is going to do the following. Student athletes will return to campus at the same time as other students, which would lead me to believe that there will not be summer mini camps, things like that. Patriot League competition will begin at the end of September, with the expectation that league play will be completed prior to Thanksgiving. Non-league games will not begin prior to Friday, September 4th. That's about a week or so later than usual for sports like soccer. Patriot League member institutions will confirm that their non-league competitors are following comparable health and safety protocols to the Patriot League.
Oh, that'll be easy. That's easy.
And then
do
this
a
is the one
walkthrough?
that's,
I mean, come on.
right. And then this is the one that might be most difficult, especially considering the Patriot League has a football league. No Patriot League teams will fly to competitions, and with rare exceptions, all regular season games will exclude overnight travel. So as long as you can do all of that, you can play sports.
So, look, I know this is going to put Lafayette football at a huge competitive disadvantage when they go on to play some of the teams in the Ivy League. So that's going to be a huge problem for them. In many ways, this becomes the first step towards a full cancellation, obviously, right? They are setting the groundwork for, if we cannot hit these very high standards, kind of like when you tell your kid, like, look, if you get all 97s, you can have that new Apple Watch. Like, and you know he's getting an 80 in math. Like, you know that. There is no scenario. Like, if you get all hundreds, I will buy you that car, right? These are easy arguments to make. So you could make the argument that they're doing that. I think it's smart. I think that what they're saying makes a whole lot of sense, because they're saying this is the only way that sport remains safe. And if we can hit those criteria, we'll do it. The problem is, when you make these decisions, you're not making them alone, because all sports, as you suggested, it's all interwoven. In many ways, this could become kind of the beginning of, shall we say, the end for fall sports. And a couple of colleges have already said no. Bowdoin has basically said we're not doing anything this fall. I think Morehouse has already said we're done. So, and those are the first two. I don't know what's going to happen in all the Cal State schools that have basically said we're online the entire fall. So I don't know what their athletics plans are. It's seeming increasingly unlikely that particularly contact sports will be able to have an actual fall season. And this may be where we start to see the dividing line. I texted a friend of mine who in sports, and I was like, oh, it looks like some sports are canceling. And I go, I wonder which ones are going to follow, which ones are going to, kind of stick it out. And he literally wrote back, the red ones. And I mean, this could be in some cases, I mean, the Patriot League teams, while they are not revenue generating. They're not worried about, like, Colgate football does not make a whole lot of money. Although Colgate's a good football program. Like, let's not underscore there's some talent in this league. Right?
Colgate won the Patriot League last year.
That's entirely possible. But they played for a national title before. Colgate's quite good. I mean, one AA national title, obviously. But I do think that I think sooner than later, some of these programs, and I know maybe it's too early just because it is, and maybe because they're afraid of losing potential enrollment if they announce, hey, this is really, we're not going to have any sports and campus is going to look totally different. I think sooner than later, schools are going to have to start to say, we are or we aren't. And I think I'd like to think by mid-July, we're going to start to see, and I absolutely do not want to see sports canceled this fall, but I am having a very hard time understanding how we play football. I really am. And I wrote about this in the commentary this week. I think we should be cognizant of what we're losing. Like, this is not, I don't like it. I don't like the kind of like almost snarky comments of like, how dare they even think about playing football? How dare they? Like, let's not underscore when we take away sports for kids, college, pro, the entire public for, what will amount to 6 months. It's more than just it's very cynical to be like, oh, it's just a business. They just want to, it's not just a business. This is like, these are people's lives. And this is what we do to kind of bring joy to it's not just like when my kid's going out to play soccer in the fall, that's not it is a business, but it's because he loves doing it. And it's because he's socialized. Like, let's not underscore what we're about to give up. But I do think this is the beginning of the end.
One thing not mentioned in the plan was anything about testing. And this gets into this week's See. We were right. Keith, you made a point a number of weeks ago that pandemics often end when people decide they end, and that we might get to a point in society, and especially with regard to sport, where you're seeing positive tests, 10, 20, perhaps 30% of participants testing positive and just rolling right through it. I think as positive tests continue to come out across college campuses where football players have brought back, as Major League Baseball ramps back up, you're seeing teams already reporting positive cases. The PGA Tour, golf, probably the most socially distant sport that we have, has had, I believe, 4 or 5 positive tests among players and caddies. And all of these institutions are rolling right along.
Yeah. Clemson, I think what they should do now is announce the Clemson athletes that do not have coronavirus. It'll be easier. So, I mean, there was like, they keep adding to it, right? And so it's like the honor roll just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And so the whole team, look, at this point, the whole team will have it. I believe someone has suggested herd immunity for Clemson football at some point, and which is ridiculous, right?
Ridiculous.
So, although it's about to happen,
Like a chickenpox party.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Look, did I not introduce you to the chickenpox party? Yes, I did. You didn't even know it's. Did
No,
you know
I knew it. I knew it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I believe I'd actually been to one. I don't know.
Sure
I was
you did.
very young.
They're great. They're great. A lot of fun. I think, look, this is what we have to deal with. There is no bubble in any of this. So we are going to have to decide whether we're going to live with the virus or not live with the virus. So we're either playing football with coronavirus or we're not playing football at all. And so I think, to the argument or to the comment you made earlier, we may decide we're going to play football with coronavirus. But that said, I almost kind of wish they'd stop reporting like these are the procedures I forget it. Like, you're not keeping anyone safe. They're playing football together. They're all going to get sick.
One sport that will not roll right through it is the sport of running. A number of major running events have been canceled across America. Things like the Boston Marathon, things like the New York Marathon, big seminal events that are not only big professional athletic events, but also participatory events that tens of thousands of people across the country train for and set as goals to participate in. They are not happening this year, and that's going to have some wide-ranging effects. It's what we're going to speak about with our guest this week.
Woo!
Jay Friedman is the host of the Pain Cave podcast. He's been described as luminaries like Keith Strudler as a, quote, pretty good ultra-marathoner. And if that's not impressive enough, he is also an ER doctor. Jay, welcome to Sportish.
Thanks for having me, guys. Great to be here.
I did not say. I said he was. To be fair, I probably said, well, we can call him elite. I may, but you know, I may have not been full throated in my endorsement of elite, but
fine.
I did. Is that fair, Jay?
I think a lukewarm endorsement of my skill is probably the best that it deserves.
And I would also say, elite marathoners kind of like jumbo shrimp. I mean, there is a limit to how much we want to ascribe athleticism to a sport where the goal is just to keep going. So
yes. And there's a big difference between an elite marathoner and an elite ultramarathoner, in which, an elite marathoner, those guys all live in Nairobi, and elite ultramarathoners are all, slightly overweight Jewish guys like me for the most part.
Yes.
Here's how I know I like Jay more than Keith already.
What?
When Keith was like, we can call Jay elite, he goes, no, please, don't do that. Whereas Keith could be below average at something, and he'd be like, I am the best in the world at this. Nobody stacks pencils better than I do.
Well, I believe I declared myself the best cyclist in Bergen County to launch this podcast. Which is
publicly. That was publicly.
I actually, that was affirmed not to be true just this morning when I went on a bike ride. So.
At the risk of inflating his head anymore, Jeff, I'm going to have to, in the interest of fairness, say that Keith is a much better triathlete than I am an ultramarathoner. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that.
He beat Lance Armstrong. Just ask
Yes.
him.
No. I've heard the story.
Well, believe me, we all have, including publicly on this program. Jay, nobody's beaten anybody in a lot of these races this year. New York City Marathon canceled, Boston Marathon canceled. This obviously has an effect on the true elite participants of these events that are doing it as a professional sporting event to make money. It also has a great effect on regular folks, on hobbyists, on people that are sub-elite, and on people that are just trying to get in shape and have a goal and an activity to train for. What do we lose with these events not happening?
Yeah, as you said, a lot of the problem with what's been going on is, when we're putting together a training plan or, just looking forward, it's really difficult to train at a high level all the time without a goal out there. And when those goals are kind of taken away from us, there's a lot of motivation that's lost. And, people start to question, especially folks who have a lot of their identity, let's say, invested in their persona as a runner, and who derive some of, their self-worth or whatever from that identity. When we start losing that identity, it starts to cause real problems. So we're seeing a lot of issues like that, where people just are feeling a little lost, feeling a little unmoored, and we're kind of searching around for different things to kind of fill that void a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about, because you still go through this ritualistic process of I'm training or I'm doing that. And so you go out, and at some point when you're out there running or biking, you're like, what am I doing this for?
Right.
And it becomes very difficult because people are so vested emotionally in their self-concept in many ways. If you asked a lot of runners, like, describe yourself, probably like one of the first or second things they might say is, I'm a runner. So
Right.
they care deeply about that as in terms of who they are, which has brought out some of the worst in some people. If you go to message boards, a lot of people would say, why don't they let us do it? We can do this. You're also, not only you an elite runner, but you're also you're also you're also an elite doctor, shall we say?
No, we shall not.
A doctor.
There you go.
As they say, what do they call the person who graduates last in medical school? A doctor.
Yes.
So, but do you think that they can safely hold endurance sports this fall?
Depends on the scale that you're talking about. And, unfortunately, it depends on the region and the prevalence of cases and that sort of thing. When they pushed Boston back, Boston obviously is usually held in mid-April, and then they pushed it back to September, hoping to have cleared the virus enough to be able to hold the event at that time. It was pretty apparent that there's no way you're going to be able to get, 25 to 35,000 people in one place, even a gigantic place, let alone Hopkinton, Massachusetts, which is not the largest of towns in the world. So these large scale events are not happening for quite some time. Now, smaller events, and in the ultra running world, the ultra marathoning world, by definition, they're all small events. I mean, the largest ultra marathon in our country is only about 1,400 people, and the vast majority of them are a couple hundred or less. Is there a scenario in which you can still hold those kind of events, especially in some of the remote locations where a lot of trail and mountain races are? Yes, that's possible. And we're already seeing that now, where a couple of race directors have worked out ways to do it with their local certifying or permitting departments so that they can hold it in what they believe is a safe way. So that, generally we're talking again about events of, between 50 and maybe a couple hundred people. And, in more remote locations, trails, mountains, where you're not going to be running into huge crowds and that sort of thing. And they're making other concessions as well. Aid stations where you're, going to get your fluids or your nutrition are going to be staffed by masked volunteers with gloves. We're used to in ultra marathons rolling up to an aid station and there's a bowl of, M&Ms or a pile of bananas and it's grab and, it's one of the least sanitary things you could ever imagine. Nobody really cares, but that's no longer the case. Now it's individually pre-wrapped portions of everything you might want and, really limited contact. And then there are different things that people are doing with registration, touchless registration, no waiting in lines for your number. Everything gets mailed out in advance. Staggering the starting grid so that people still have some space rather than all being crammed in as we normally are, kind of shoulder to shoulder. Again, not something you're going to be able to do at New York City or something like that, but in a race where, there's 200 people where you can do that. Those are the kind of workarounds that we're seeing and we're starting to see them pop up here and there. And I think through the fall, you'll see that on these really small scale local races. And, the ultra marathon sport is kind of set up to do that sort of thing well, but on a large scale, no. And unfortunately for a lot of the local road races that, a lot of charities depend on, or a lot of businesses, have sponsorship arrangements and that sort of thing for just your local 5K and 10K, that's probably not happening anytime soon either, because a lot of these things that we're talking about that trail races have been able to do to mitigate some of the risk are just not going to be possible in, even in a small to medium sized town where you're kind of compressing people together.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the fundraising aspect of these races, large or small, because the Boston Marathon, the New York City Marathon, there's usually a fundraising component tied into just being able to participate in these events. So good that people will have an outlet, if they were preparing for one of these major events to maybe do something locally. But, you think about people that not only trained for the Boston Marathon, but raised often tens of thousands of dollars for a cause for their spot. That money may not, the amount of money that they may have been able to raise may have been less because of these races being canceled. And then, you think, oh, this person did all this to have this seminal life moment. They may not just get in next year, right? They're not just going to roll the field over to 2021. They might have to do it all again. And so I think there's a lot lost outside of the athletics, there's a lot lost from a societal perspective of the good that a lot of these events do.
For sure. And I'm not sure how they're going to be able to do it for some of these big races, like you mentioned, in terms of, can you just roll the field over? I mean, most races are offering deferments to next year, refunds in some cases. But as you say, Geoff, there's, especially for something like Boston or New York, this is the culmination of many years of work for a lot of people, especially something like Boston, where for the most part, you need a qualifying time. And it's not clear yet how that's going to happen for next year. Are all those people automatically going to be, or have the option to, keep their spot and run again next year if we are even able to do it next April? Is there going to be a new qualifying period or something like that? That's unclear at this point. And even at the Olympic level, we had an Olympic marathon trials only about a month before the implications of the coronavirus pandemic really came to this country. We chose Olympic marathoners, 3 for the men, 3 for the women. The point of the marathon trials and the Olympic trials in general, that system, is to select the team that's best prepared to compete in the Olympics. Have we really, if we're keeping that Olympic team for a possible Olympics in summer of 2021, you're hard pressed to say that that's the best prepared 3 men and 3 women for a race that was held 18 months previously. So
what if you let yourself go, right?
Well, but as you know, Keith, 18 months is a very long time. I mean, it's a
long time.
I'm sure Abdurrahman is not going to, put on 15 pounds of pandemic weight, but he's an older runner. He's almost my age. 18 months from the Olympic trials, he might not be, and he got that spot very narrowly over the 4th place finisher. Not that he doesn't deserve it. He's a multiple-time Olympian. He's fantastic. But 18 months later, he may not be the best prepared marathoner. How do you go to him and say, look, you earned your spot, but now do it again? I don't see that happening. But at the same time, then we're maybe, just we've gone away from the mission of the Olympic trials to select the quote unquote best prepared team that's going to compete in the Olympics. So, there are ripples throughout that the every level of sport that are yet to be completely determined.
Yeah, by the way, when you were talking about the ultra marathons, I was trying to envision, Geoff, what it would be like if he had to complete.
Oh, I couldn't. So, I mean, I've watched the documentary, The Barkley Marathon.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd get tired on the drive to the start line. It wouldn't be funny because it wouldn't go on long enough to be funny. I'd get 3 miles in and I'd be like, I got a can of beans in the trunk. I'm going to go eat that and then just wait for everybody to come in.
I believe I asked, because I think we've talked about this race, the SOS triathlon, which is this kind of crazy triathlon where you have to, bring all your shoes across the lake. And one that I've done a lot, and Jay, very well. And I asked Geoff, I think years ago, if you had to do this to try to survive, his hope would be that he just didn't make it past the first lake and went under there, so he wouldn't have to prolong the pain any longer. He should walk off. I actually think he might have a heart attack on the hill up.
The mindset that you guys have as to whatever it is, people talk about runner's high or the the conquering goals, whatever it is. I don't have that. A goal for me is an on-time food delivery to my house.
Okay, it's important. It's important.
It's fair.
But
it's fair.
It's
Look,
true.
I don't pretend.
Geoff will not run. Geoff won't run
this.
anywhere. He won't run. As we've documented, he won't run through an airport. He will not. He just not pick up his pace at all. And at some point, and I've said this before, you're not getting any younger. It is going to catch it will come home to roost. I mean, you will.
Famously, I say I will run if chased. And if forced to do any leg of a triathlon, I think I would choose the cycling. I feel as though if forced, I would cycle. That seems to be the one that I would enjoy the most.
It's the most it's the leg that a 7-year-old kid would be most likely to succeed at.
And that is my sweet spot. That's where I'd like to be. So I'm glad that you've actually endorsed my plan. If anything, you've moved me a half step closer to getting out on 2 wheels.
So, Jay, we were talking about this idea that so many athletes put so much of themselves into training for these big races, right? And we all know people who are like, hey, I'm training for New York City Marathon. And it becomes annoying because they want to make sure everyone knows, like, no, can't go out tonight, training for the marathon.
Sure.
I'm sure
a thousand internet memes.
Another reason why I don't understand your people.
Okay, sorry, gotta get to sleep early. Can't eat the burger tonight. I'm training for the marathon, right? So and it is highly annoying. We all understand that. But if we're gonna have to sit out for a considerable amount of time, or if an activity like this brings a certain element of fear, or if people become kind of disenfranchised because of how they feel. I know a lot of people are angry at the Ironman organization because they were going to have these races, and then one in particular was canceled like 2 days before, happened to have been scheduled for Texas. So things weren't looking good. But do you think, but I like how they were like until about 24 hours before, they're like, this thing looks great. We're going to be fine. Nothing to see here. So do you think that long term, do you think this is going to turn people off to, kind of making this part of their life? Do you think a lot of people are going to be turned off from this kind of endurance sport, and they're just going to sit in their basement and do Les Mills fitness videos?
I think I think there will be a certain.
Don't knock them until you try them. Do not knock them until you try them.
Of all the people you could have picked, who is Les Mills?
Les Mills.
No,
he's a New Zealand rock star. The guy comes on, and you don't understand. You get up there, and you're like, woo! And you.
Sorry, Jeff. I'm sorry. We did this exact segment for 15 minutes on my pod like 2 weeks ago. So sorry.
I'm an apostle. I am an apostle. I'm a Les Mills apostle. I started doing these videos in quarantine, and I can't stop myself. I love it. I do the burpees, and I do all the jumping, and then the guys are like, "Are you ready?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm ready." And like we talk. It's great. It's great. Don't knock it. I would pay money to watch Jeff on a video doing a Les Mills fitness video.
I will accept money to do a Les Mills fitness video. That's about what it would take.
Okay, so the non-Les Mills portion of the question. I there may be a certain subset of folk that are going to be turned off by this. My suspicion is it's going to be fairly small. The type of folks who are getting into running for purely fitness aspects or purely fitness gains, who would otherwise be doing something else like fitness videos or CrossFit or something like that, is a non-negligible but a small percentage. And I think the number of people who progress from that stage to running marathons or ultra marathons or being kind of long time or long-term adopters of the sport, I think is even smaller. Certainly there are people who are into the sport just because they are very goal-oriented. And so it may be that running a marathon is the thing that motivates them to get out and train every day, and that beyond reaching that goal, there's really no enjoyment or fulfillment that they gain from it. But I think that's a smaller percentage of people than we realize, especially in the ultramarathoning world. And what we've seen in the world of ultras is kind of this rededication, at least on social media, that a lot of people have had to just the idea of running, finding fulfillment and enjoyment in your daily running, finding fulfillment with just the grind of training and with the process of it. Just that, and I think that's where I think most of us who have been doing this for a long time certainly are getting their enjoyment. And so I think not having these things to train for is frustrating in the short term. In the long term, for most people, I think if you've kind of gone through a training cycle and you know how the sport makes you feel and you know what you're getting out of it beyond just a medal or something to brag about around the water cooler the week after the marathon, I think most people are going to come through okay. And we have seen certainly many people rededicating themselves to fitness in general, unfortunately, because maybe they have more time because they're not working as much, or just because it's a stress relief or something like that. But there are plenty of stories out there of people who have been able to adopt new workout routines, running for the first time and really enjoying it because of this. So it does work both ways, I think.
Yeah, not Jeff.
Nope.
Give it another few months. You never know.
So as we sort of dived into the psychosis of some of these things, and some would call it a psychosis. I'm that person. Both of you have not only competed in high level competitive races and triathlons and ultramarathons, have also taken. There's no good segue here. You've done an events involving food. So whether it's the New Paltz Pizza Run that Jay has organized here in upstate New York, or Keith Strudler famously championing the Cornell Dining Hall Classic.
Yeah. First champion.
There's
I'm not,
There's no length that you guys won't go to for extreme endurance competition. And it's just mind-blowing.
So the New Paltz Pizza Challenge, as you mentioned, Geoff, thank you. Go to newpaltzpizzachallenge.com. No, I'm just kidding. That's not a thing. Yeah. That actually grew out of the Dining Hall Classic, which
keep this brief. We only got a couple minutes here, so give us the short version.
The history of the Dining Hall Classic is a long and storied one, but Keith, yes, is the initial champion. Now, I will say that you have yet to come show us your prowess at the Pizza Challenge. So I'm
not coming out. I said this.
You retired.
I will brag a little bit. I'm fairly well known in this circle. Like this is, I was very much, I was very on the forefront of this industry. I mean, a lot of people have copied what I've done. I probably haven't gotten, I don't know. I mean, I don't check the listservs, the message boards. I hope my name still pops up, but I'm very much a grandfather of this industry.
Are you like the Fosbury of sport/food events?
I mean, Dick Fosbury really revolutionized an already existing event. He might be more like you might be like the James Naismith.
I like it. I think that's a much better analogy.
Well, I don't know that you invented it. You kind of blended them together. People were eating and people were running before you.
That he invented the idea of putting food in his mouth. That's not what I'm saying.
I was very much like the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup guy, right?
Much closer. Yeah, much closer.
So I was pretty well known. I'm not planning on, so I, launched this Dining Hall Classic and did quite well. I did a fair amount. I actually, oddly enough, decided when I got to Florida for grad school, I left the eating, the running part aside in this and just went into straight eating competitions for a while because I was doing so well. Because I, and
you got to play to your strengths.
Absolutely. I was better. I was a decent runner, but no one was better than shoving pizza into his pie hole than this guy. Right.
I will say that the overlap of the kind of amalgamation of running and eating together has really proliferated, and that is a nice little subsegment, very, very weird, but a very fun subsegment of the sport between the beer mile, the taco mile, the what's the donut one, the Krispy Kreme challenge. To be fair, most of these grew out of very bored collegiate track runners at 2:00 in the morning on their various campuses and have gone somewhat mainstream, I guess. But it is a fun little subset.
See, you really can have it all. Go grab a snack. That's all the time we've got for this episode of Sportish. Jay Friedman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. This was fun.
Don't forget to find our podcast wherever podcasts are served. Give us a 5-star review and check us out on Twitter at SportishPod for clips and information about where this episode would air. For our producer, Mike Wallace, Dr. Keith Strudler, my name is Geoff Brault. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Sportish. See you next time.